All right. Hello and welcome. It is Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022, and this is our lunch study break. We are here following up on last week's discussion, which commemorated International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And the topic that I'd like to talk about this week, and I think it might bleed into next week's discussion, came out of a request following that conversation, which is, how do we process anger? What does Jewish tradition teach us about the utility of anger? That has been a very pronounced emotion that I think many of us have been dealing with, either internally or externally. It is a part of our environment, unfortunately, perhaps more so because of the pressurized nature of our pandemic existence. And so we wanted to address some of these, look at some of the sources and see if we can gain any greater insight. Is there a use for anger? Is there righteous anger that has a utility to it? What do our Jewish sources say about this? And also, let's acknowledge, that where there's real anger that we are feeling about the world in which we live for any number of reasons. I'm going to begin in just a moment by sharing one of those things that might have elicited some upset for some folks here, especially in light of last week's discussion, the last couple of days. But in addition to doing what we're going to be doing here, which is grappling philosophically through dialogue, through a dialectic about what we do as a community to process the anger that so many of us are feeling, and what do our sources have to say about that? We also want to experience it through ritual. And as my professor of blessed memory, Rabbi Neil Gilman, used to teach, that when our society breaks down and there is chaos, it is not often the theology that rescues us, but it is often our practices. So it is not necessarily the theology embedded inside of the mourner's cottage that is most significant, but it is the ritual of coming together in a minyan to mourn the death of a loved one. And so towards that end, we still want to experience a matter of rejoice and rejoicing. And so I wanted to just have Reb Tzvi begin today, before we get into a very heavy, challenging conversation, and share what he's going to be providing to this community as we process all of these things and try to capture a little bit of joy. So I'm going to give him 2 minutes, Reb, to share with us what he plans, what he is planning for us, both online and in person. You have to unmute yourself, Reb.
Thank you, Reb Dan. By the way, the Kabbalah and Hasidism has a lot to say about anger, but I'll reserve that until much later in the discussion. So again, thank you, Reb Dan, for the opportunity. I kind of got hired by the synagogue to be the resident Kabbalist, the resident mystic. What can I do for you? Do you need a golem, possibly, or a calf conjured up out of thin air? Just let me know. I'm not sure I could do it, but I'll try. Anyways, what am I actually doing, and what would I like to do? Hold on, let me get rid of the phone. Yeah. Thank you. Coming right up this Shabbos, this weekend, we're doing an experiment with a Zoom Kabbalah Shabbat service, sacred ecstatic music, and the musicians will be myself. It'll be 4 p.m. It'll be early, 4 p.m. on Zoom, and there is a Zoom button on the synagogue's website. It's a little bit hard to get to, but you can do it. Contact me if you want me to take you through the process of getting to that button, but it'll be a sacred ecstatic musical Kabbalah Shabbat service with myself providing the voice and some of the little Sufi stories, and our wonderful Middle Eastern percussionist, Susie Goldenstein. Some of you heard her at the live Kabbalat Shabbat service in early December, and we hope to be live again in a month, God and COVID willing. But in any event, it will be a Zoom Kabbalat Shabbat musical service this Friday, 4 p.m. And really invite your Jewish friends, invite your interfaith friends. We sing and chant in a lot of different languages: Hebrew, English, Arabic, Turkish, Aramaic, and the service, I think, let me know, give me your feedback, explains itself. The other thing happening the very next day at 12:15 p.m. in the meditation garden, outdoors, will be our continuing 12-session series class workshop on structures of consciousness from a Jewish perspective. We do a lot of different stuff. We're doing Jewish meditation. We have dialogue. We discuss things. We do indeed discuss structures. The structures that we're working on right now are the four worlds of consciousness, and using the four worlds as a ladder to getting from what is my sacred purpose on the planet and how do I deploy it in the universe. So we're going to take a couple of weeks to go slowly through the four worlds.
Thank you, Reb Tzvi. I appreciate all your input. And I'm gonna start selling your program for this Friday, because I think the pitch for how to sell it is this: if you've been too apprehensive of going into a Sufi Jufi service, check it out without having to actually step through those doors, and have a unique opportunity to do that. And that's sort of going to be my pitch. So thank you very much. All right, so we're going to begin now to follow up on last week's conversation, and I would like to share a clip from this morning from ABC News. And in light of our conversation last week, I am curious to hear your impressions. Okay. If everyone can just mute yourself as I do this. Okay.
Breaking news overnight. The View co-host Whoopi Goldberg suspended for 2 weeks for her comments about the Holocaust. Ariel Reshev has the story. Good morning, Ariel.
Good morning to you, George. Though Goldberg has apologized, her comments sparked a firestorm, some seeing this as a troubling sign of fading understanding about the horrors of the Holocaust.
This morning, ABC News suspending Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks in response to her inflammatory remarks about the Holocaust. ABC News President Kim Godwin saying in a statement, effective immediately, I am suspending Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks for her wrong and hurtful comments. While Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. The entire ABC News organization stands in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues, friends, family, and communities.
If you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race.
On Monday's show, the host of ABC's The View inaccurately claimed the Holocaust was not related to race.
It's not about race. It's not about race. What is it about? Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about. Whoopi Goldberg.
Goldberg appearing to double down on The Colbert Show that night.
The American experience tends to be based on skin.
Yes. And so that is what race means to me. When you talk about being a racist, I was saying you can't call this racism. This was evil. This wasn't based on the skin. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. They had to delve deeply to figure it out.
Then tweeting an apology, saying in part, the Jewish people around the world have always had my support, and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I have caused. And the next day, opening The View with this.
I said that the Holocaust wasn't about race, and it was instead about man's inhumanity to man. But it is indeed about race, because Hitler and the Nazis considered Jews to be an inferior race. Now, words matter, and mine are no exception. I regret my comments, as I said, and I stand corrected. I also stand with the Jewish people, as they know and y'all know, because I've always done that.
By the end of the Holocaust, just 77 years ago, 6 million Jews had been murdered.
That might not fit exactly or feel different than the way we think about race in 21st century America, where primarily it's about people of color. But throughout the Jewish people's history, they have been marginalized, they have been persecuted, they have been slaughtered, in large part because many people felt they were not just a different religion, but indeed a different race.
The head of the Anti-Defamation League warning anti-Semitism is still a real and present danger.
We need people on good faith on the left and the right to call this out forcefully, fully, without hesitation.
And studies show an alarming decline in knowledge about the Holocaust at a time when anti-Semitism has surged to unprecedented levels. The FBI saying Jews are the most targeted for religious-based hate crimes in this country. And George, as you heard there, Goldberg saying she regrets her comments and any hurt they may have caused.
Yes, she did. Okay, Ariel, thanks very much.
Okay, so as I mentioned, there are some disturbing images and thoughts in that piece there. That is from this morning. So that is 3 hours ago. And I'm curious if there are any reactions to that. Yes, Susan.
We were just talking about it in the group I'm in last night, and it was before Whoopi got canceled for 2 weeks. And I said, I bet they're going to cancel her. I accept her apology. I think it was heartfelt, and I think that she sincerely apologized, and it really does upset me that she's been suspended for 2 weeks because of that. I mean, if she had not apologized, that would be different, but she acknowledged that she was wrong, and she apologized, and she made statements all over the place about it. And but I think it's interesting that I'm more upset about that than about what she said.
Well, that's why I sort of am setting this up ambiguously, as I always like to do. You know that. There are many things that are upsetting here. There are many things that might elicit anger from that little 3.5 minute bit there. And you mentioned one of them, this desire for sort of this, why, what's making you upset is this punitive need for someone who's already apologized. Okay, thank you, Susan. Other reactions, other thoughts? Judy.
I agree with Susan. I think this was a mistake. I think the apology was sincere and it was fast. And I don't know what else you can ask from somebody in that position. If she had not done that, then things would be different. But I think this is the wrong move.
To punish her. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm, just so you know where I'm coming from, if you're wondering, I'm almost always, and people criticize me, I went to law school. I have a father who's a journalist, and I practice religion. So I have a strong affinity for the First Amendment. So just so you know where I come from, that is the perspective where I'm coming from. Judah, and then Marv.
Did you just say you believe she should be able to say whatever she wants to say? I don't quite understand what you just said, Rabbi Ain. But anyway, she apologized right away because she really had no choice.
No, because she's a good person.
Excuse me?
Someone said she apologized right away because she was a good person. I'm not sure who said that, but that someone did contribute that.
That's not, that's
not your take. So you tell me what you think.
That's not my take. She has I like Whoopi. I don't, adore her. I like her. I have nothing against her. I think this is a great teachable moment. I don't believe she should have been put on hiatus for 2 weeks. But I also, when she said, "Oh, it's just you white people, battling each other," that to me is a little bit of reverse racism. Just putting it on because we're white, blaming it on that we're white instead of, this horrible thing that the Holocaust was. And, she has a history. She's very self-confident and assured of her views, as she was in the show yesterday, when she was spouting this bullshit. And, she also defended Cosby for a long time. And, but this one, no, I really believe she had no, I believe her apology, but she really had no choice. This was a horrible horrible things she said.
A misstep, and perhaps, depending, I mean, we're all going to view it differently through whatever lens that we're going to view it. And that's what I'm curious to see. Marv.
Can I ask a question later?
Yeah, Aubrey. Yeah, go right ahead, Aubrey. And then.
Okay, I think it was a stupid thing that she did, very stupid. And she should pay a little bit for the consequences. My thought is, does she have any Jewish blood in her? She's got a Jewish last name.
No, she took it.
No, but I always thought there was a Jewish connection there, but I don't believe that there is, also because of the Goldberg name. But I believe that that's a stage name that she took on, if I'm not mistaken.
I thought it was just a stupid thing that she did. And unfortunately, when you do stupid things, you sometimes have to.
All right, there you go. So Aubrey's got an approach, Judah. It's not about First Amendment. You do stupid things, you have to pay prices. It's not about freedom of speech. It's about doing stupid things. Okay, Marv.
Well, actually, the most disappointing thing to me is how people of our generation, well, my generation, Whoopi Goldberg is a little older individual, how they can't separate concepts. I mean, yes, it's man's inhumanity to man, but it's like denying Jewish existence. We have a right to be a people of self-determination. We exist. And so to say that the Holocaust is man's inhumanity to man, I mean, it really doesn't recognize the fact that this basically was an act against the Jewish people. There were others involved, but it's a conclusion that this does disservice to us. And it clearly was a racial inferiority that the Germans were stressing. So for people to come to a conclusion that doesn't accept that, doesn't recognize it, is just a terrible fact to me.
Yeah, I think that, I think so far people have pointed out some of the two things that upset me. Anger is a strong word, and we'll learn how strong that word is in a moment. One is this punishment part. I resonate with what was shared by Judy and Susan a lot. And I also resonate, Marv, with what you share, this idea that there is a narrative in this country about race, and that's a sacred narrative, and that the Holocaust cannot fit into that narrative because that narrative is sacred in this country. And you end up with unfortunate statements like this, which you have to be peeled back and apologized for because of some pre-existing narrative. And I think we're caught right in the middle of that as, Jews. Are we a religion? Are we a faith? Are we a race? We're both, right? We don't fit into those categories. And when we had the representative from the JCRC come and talk about if you remember the ethnic studies curriculum, one of the conversations was about where do the Jews fit in? The categories are set up where it's by race. So you almost have to accept a certain classification of what Judaism is that undercuts what the expansive nature of what Judaism has been for the purpose of fitting into a curriculum. And I find that to be upsetting and limiting to who we are as a people. Other thoughts, Jeff?
Yeah, just to answer something you mentioned a moment ago, she claims Goldberg is in her family background. But and she's been saying this all along, but I think she was on Gates show, Finding Your Roots, and they did a genetic. She's 92% sub-Saharan African and 8%. I just looked it up on Wikipedia, and she according to them, she doesn't actually have a Jewish background, but she has always claimed that it's somewhere in her background.
I always, I grew up with Whoopi Goldberg in the 80s. I always thought she was mishpacha. So that's kind of, where I'm coming. I'm kind of where I'm coming from with Whoopi. All right. So what I want to do now is pivot. So to see those tiki torches is also disconcerting. So I just want to acknowledge that's hard to see. That elicits strong emotion and perhaps an anger. There are lots of things which we can't be angry about. And that's what we're going to take a look. So let me open. I had a wonderful colleague of mine by the name of Rabbi Ben, and he's in the middle of the country. And he's been working to compile a bunch of Musar texts. And so we shared these texts with me, and I'd like to walk us through some of them and see what the tradition has to say about anger. Maybe we can come into, I'm speaking about myself here, maybe we can come into touch with our own responses, and maybe we can learn how, to handle what we're grappling with here in a world in which the Holocaust seems to be, questioned or whatever, and doubted. I think it is hard where we see people, where there's lots of things. I don't have to list the things which we could be upset about. So let's take a look, and let's begin with some texts from the older part of our tradition. So here's Kohelet. Here is Kohelet, which says, "Be not hasty in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the lap of fools." Anger rests in the lap of fools. All right, so that is, I have many different pages, so I'm going to read a number of sources, and then we'll pull back and we'll try to understand what the coherent response around anger is. Here's from the Bavli. This is from Psachim. "Any man who becomes enraged, if he is wise, he loses his wisdom, and if he is a prophet, he loses his prophecy." Here is the Rambam. "Those who frequently become angry have no quality of life. Therefore, the sages instructed us to distance ourselves from anger to the farthest degree, until a person acts as though he does not sense even those things that would justifiably anger a person." The Orach Stakim says, "Anger causes a person to be stubborn, and because of his anger, a person will not make concessions and he will not admit the truth." Here's the Bavli with Rashi. "You can recognize a person's true nature by three things: his drink, how he controls his mind when he drinks; his pocket, what his integrity is in business," said Rashi; "and his anger." Rashi says that he is not extremely demanding and is not upset by things that anger most people. Here are some more. Okay, Svi, go right ahead. And if anybody wants to interrupt, feel free to raise your hand. Yes, Svi.
Just a quick Hebrew note. There are two words, at least as far as I can tell in Hebrew. The word that appears, Reb Dan, in the Hebrew of most of the texts that you've shown us is ka'as. And indeed that means anger, but it also means to become upset. I mean, and there is certainly a distinction in English between "I'm really angry" with "I'm upset." There is a difference. There's a different word in the Hebrew which comes into the Yiddish that just means "I'm angry," and that's mitragez, rogez. And indeed, as my mother would often say concerning her sister, unfortunately, "I'm broiges with her," right? Broiges in Yiddish.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that distinction in our Jewish languages.
Yeah, but then what do you make of the read here of the Rambam? And the word that they use is ka'as or koes, right? It seems to be quite the emotion, much stronger than upset in terms of how they're using it. Judah?
Yeah, I just want to share my personal story that I'm in 12 step, have been for many years, but I'm more of a Musser student. And one of the things that drew me more to Musser was in 12-step work, they talk about character defects. And I don't like the idea of thinking that I'm defective, and when you go into Musser, you're talking, the character defects become traits. And you have the trait, and the problem is traits can become unbalanced. So anger is not necessarily a character defect. It's something we all have, but the idea is to have it in balance. Like they say, an example is, and this is not anger, but if you for somehow reason have bloodlust, you can either become a murderer or you become a shochet. You can channel the trait into something positive. And so I don't think, whoever it was, Maimonides saying, people need to be free of anger. I don't think that's a possibility. I think it's a normal character trait. It's just whether it's in balance or out of balance. There certainly is righteous anger. And another thing I've read, I can't remember whether it's was or not, is, but when anger turns into rage, that's when you make it an idol.
So
I'm worshiping an idol. You feed it.
So beautiful. And we're going to get into idolatry. But before we do that, you pointed something out, which is very Aristotelian. And I'm often Aristotelian in my thinking. I tell my son, always think of the middle path, the golden mean. You can have too much courage, have just enough courage, not too little courage, not too much courage, classic Aristotle. And as I was reading through and studying these sources, here is a source from who is the most Aristotelian of all of our thinkers, of course, is the Rambam. So here's the Rambam, Judah, on your point. Okay, there are certain character traits that one must distance oneself from in the extreme. In fact, it is forbidden to take the standard approach of the middle path regarding these character traits. Anger is an extremely negative character trait, and it is fitting for a person to distance himself from it to the opposite extreme. One should train oneself never to become angry, even regarding things for which anger might be justified for. Okay, we don't have to agree with the rabbi, but what do you think here, Judah? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know either. And Judy's laughing. Like there are times, in our lives in which we've been on the right side of history, and we've been on the right side of history because we've been angry about the way things were going. And good. It's a semantic. Good. It's always semantics. It's always semantics. So tell me, do it.
It's impossible not to be angry with what we've seen happen to our country in the past 4 years. How can you distance yourself from anger? Or these people who are making COVID go on for years because they're denying it, not being vaccinated. Anger is a suitable.
That is my question. That is the session's question. That is precisely the question that I want to ask this week. And it looks like probably next too, because I have lots more sources. Oh, look at that. Donna's deep in thought. Susan.
I'm finding, as a person who's old enough to have been through the 60s and was full of righteous anger about the war in Vietnam, and has since read quite a lot about how ridiculously black and white we looked at it, and living in a time of great conflict in the country, I'm oriented more towards not being angry and towards being able to speak with people who have a different point of view. And in groups like Living Room Conversations or Better Angels or any number of groups that exist right now.
Or this.
You can't communicate or even begin to hear someone with a different point of view than your own if you're angry. It's not possible. You're too, you've got your lizard brain just pumping out the hormones. And I think our tradition teaches us that. I mean, that famous story about the oven of Achnai that everyone loves to focus just on. Oh, look, the rabbis were democratic and they voted, voted him out. But ultimately, the repercussions of that story, if you keep reading it, are caused death to Gamliel. I mean, the rage of the rage from the unjust punishment leads to death. I mean, it's real clear in our tradition.
But I mean, to take the question that was just asked, Susan, and I'll call you Rabbi for this question. How do you look at what has happened in the last 4 years or in the world, or how do you look at Eichmann and what we saw, and not tap into, what did you say, your lizard brain? I mean,
I'm more like Hannah Arendt. I look at it the way she did. I am able to, and Trump, same with Trump. I mean, I want to bring curiosity. I want to work really hard to overcome my anger and be curious. What's going on here? Why do people like this guy? And I've actually been on a couple of these conversations with people who are right-wing on living room conversations, and they're nice people. They actually, have been through certain experience, and it makes them just have this way of looking at the world. And if you actually listen, I mean, there's a great, I highly recommend this, Sholem Hartman Institute. You can get a video of a discussion that Christine Hayes did about Talmud and civil conversation. And she talks about her own experience talking to someone who was an anti-vaxxer, and she brought curiosity. She looked at the model of the rabbis. I love that word. I love that word, curiosity. Mm-hmm. I think practical mantras, when you see something like the tiki torches or whatever, and your head wants to explode in anger, can you become curious in that moment? I don't know. I think it's hard. It's hard. I think, yeah. That would be hard. That is hard. But I think it's an idea. I think it's an idea, Susan. Because I love curiosity, and I'm always interested. And like you said, Hannah Arendt was particularly interested in the nature of evil itself, which ultimately she was so interested and curious about it that people didn't appreciate her tone. They didn't appreciate that tone of open curiosity. They didn't even like she was that openly curious. Well, plus where it takes you. You don't have the good guys and the bad guys anymore. You have human beings who, including people in the Jewish Council, when you're looking at Eichmann, I mean, that no one wants to look at that because it's too painful. And I understand why it's painful, but I don't think the solution is to just have angry people battling it out. No, clearly not. No, I think an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, as we read last week in the Torah portion. Anybody who hasn't spoken, who wants to come in here? Anybody who I haven't heard from who'd like to contribute? Yeah, go, Bob. 1 second while you unmute.
I think that Rabbi Lou used to talk about, he had conversations with Deepak Chopra and stuff, talking about how meditation can quell that lizard brain or the brainstem or whatever, the lower reptilian brain and so on and so forth. And he kind of had that. And I think that there's a fine line too between also maybe creating too much passivity. So I think that there's kind of a balance there, and that's something that we all kind of have to deal with on a daily basis.
Which is what's interesting about Rambam's quote, is you would think he would want to achieve that balance. At least I tell you the truth, when I got requested to do anger, that's where I often go to, and that's sort of golden mean, Aristotelian approach for virtues, right? I mean, maybe anger is not a virtue. And that Rambam saying it's not. At no point is it a virtue. But I am figuring out how to balance that, figuring out when I am shaking and someone has kidnapped a rabbi, and I'm like this. I don't know if I can sit in meditation for a half an hour. I think it's for just me. That's me. For me, I can get curious maybe because that's more active. I know what Rabbi Lou would say. Rabbi Lou is precisely the active brain that you need to shut down. Like, that's the point. But boy, that is hard. And I think what Rabbi Lou taught, and I didn't have the privilege of learning with him, but I know what Rabbi Lou taught is that practice is essential. Practice, practice, practice. You need to practice that sit. And if you don't practice, you can't expect it to be there for you in those moments. So,
Rabbi Ain, I was going to mention Rabbi Lou, so can I?
No, go right ahead, Judah.
Yeah. So I don't mean to dominate, but so I don't know if we're going to get to the point where you have to define anger, what it is. And by the way, the thing with sitting, because I have a sitting practice as well, is you don't have something happen and go, oh, I got to go sit. I mean, sitting is something that you do every day. And so it's not like taking an aspirin. It's something that, anyway, but I was thinking,
No, that's a great point for those of us who don't have a practice. That's really good to
Rabbi
know.
Lou. But I would guess that it was anger that motivated him to go to every execution at San Quentin. I would imagine it was anger that motivated him to go sleep in Golden Gate Park with the homeless. But you may want to call it something besides anger. I don't know. But to me, that's, that appears to me to be the motivating factor rather than go to a living room discussion about how horrible some things are. Do some action about it and try and change the world.
Thank you, Judah. I think you're really articulating the conversation very well. Reb Tzvi.
Rambam Maimonides, in the very same chapter of his book, in which I've studied, Ilchot Deot, temperament, says anger is a bad thing, but he also says it's okay to pretend anger in certain situations, like teaching children. Yes, it's right there in the text. Two, and this is others like Judah have said it, and thank you, Judah. I would say these words: what I'm looking for in myself when I feel angry is, how do I respond in a skillful manner to the situation? I can't stop feeling, my feelings are my feelings. How do I nonetheless then go on to respond in a way which is beneficial to myself and others?
So let's take a look here. This comes from Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, a Musar teacher. And he says here, we will train ourselves to be patient. This goes back to this practice. We will fix a specific amount of time every day, for example, approximately 15 minutes, in which we will strive to bear with patience all that we see and hear, even when things may be upsetting to us, and even if they are hurtful to us, without losing our composure at all. In cases where it is necessary or obligatory to react, we will do so with measured, calm words without being, there's that word, hitragshut, emotional. Now, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I think everybody knows that. And I was told quite oftenly as a child to curb my enthusiasm, which I don't appreciate. So I get it. This is the Musar teachers. I'm trying to learn from him. Here's another Musar teacher. How can a person successfully work toward uprooting anger? One needs to recognize the root cause of anger and how to manage it. So here's what he says. A person's wants and desires, or ratzon, their will, are at the core of who a person is and their greatest drive. The reason why anger is so difficult to control is that one is angered by a situation which goes directly against one's ratzon, or desire. The anger, and this is back to that idolatry point, which was brought up earlier, is triggered because the situation is going against the me. I was talking to a bat mitzvah student. She's having her bat mitzvah in a couple of weeks, and she's got the Torah portion Kitisa about the golden calf. And the Haftarah she's reading is all about Elijah battling with those who are going towards the god of Baal. And that word Baal, the ultimate idol, is ownership, mine, like from Hamilton, right? The King George and Hamilton, mine, right? So I think that was there. All right, maybe that was Ben Chin and Achashverosh. But nonetheless, mine, that ownership of idolatry. Both equally wonderful performances. That need to own is the source of idolatry. And so when we get upset, Rabbi Luchter is saying, it is our need to own it. It goes against our will. So he says the opposite of anger is patience. The Hebrew word for patience is savlanut, sovel, a burden, which means to bear something. Patience is bearing the burden of one's own ratzon or desire. So we might have a real desire to own my neighbor's Bentley. By the way, I have no desire to own my neighbor's Bentley. It's just such a wonderful piece here to discuss. You might really like but that desire, you're just going to have to bear it. You're just going to have to bear that will or desire to own it. The goal of dealing with your anger is being able to bear the burden of something that goes against your will. And here's Rebbetzin Fag-Torsky. She's from Aish.com. So here's what she says from Aish. All of our behaviors and expressions of emotions are preceded by thought. Our take on any given situation we confront begins with the way we perceive it. There is no objective reality at play. Witness the fact that one day a given situation undoes us, and the very same set of circumstances doesn't phase us at another time, right? I mean, I usually make a habit of sleeping on everything and anything. I always think it's a good idea to sleep anything because I find myself in a different frame of mind the next day. But we are the interpreters, we are the thinkers. Awareness of this fact should allow us to step back when we have one of the negative thoughts attacking that sparks anger and ask ourselves if this is the bus we want to take. We have the wherewithal, if we so choose, to drop the contaminating thought and move on, thereby making room for the clear thinking of our innate wisdom, the better part of ourselves. A second component of this approach is that, generally speaking, when we feel affronted or take offense, it is about me. It is our ego that is bruised, and the anger is the defense of ego. In reality, the affront seems to be personal, is rarely about us. The inappropriate behavior of the other, which triggers our hurt and anger, generally comes from a place of insecurity in the person provoking us. So if we are able to recognize that truth, perhaps we can find a port in the storm. Thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know how to use the phone to make it so that my hand is raised.
Oh, yeah. So just interrupt whenever, Marcia. That's fine.
I'm sorry, but
no. I'm being serious.
You know, but I think that there's another kind of way of looking at this. My husband had given us a talk, and he had said, for example, that the cigarette industry was targeting Black people with menthol cigarettes to try to get them hooked on cigarettes, and that wasn't good for them. And he got some pushback. Now, the things he was quoting were things that had been published by Black researchers. But the point was, he had some student come up to him and was very unhappy because it made her feel like a victim. And I thought, I wouldn't have felt like a victim. I would have felt angry that someone was trying to hurt me, not angry with the person who was informing me that this was going on and made good case that, yeah, this was the truth, but rather I would have been motivated to do something about it. And I don't mean yelling and screaming. I mean organizing. So I think there's a point where anger, how depression is anger turned inward. I think that victimization can also be anger turned inward. And that's not productive.
What do you I think you guys are right on it. I mean, I think it's fascinating to think about. It's interesting, Marcia, to see the tradition come out very they don't want to use it. It's like a fire that burns too hot, it seems to me, from a lot of these sources. And that, yeah, obviously we need to organize and stop, the terrible the tobacco industry. I mean, my God, if nothing's going to enrage you to go do something, there you go. You're going to be enraged to go stop that murder. But it seems like the tradition is afraid of it, and they don't even want to have you have a taste of it. And now let's take a look here. This is another source here. This is Reb Shneur Zalman, of course, from the Hasidic tradition. Anyone who gets angry is considered as if he serves idolatry. And what's the reason for this? The reason for this is that when a person is enraged, let's see what word he uses here. Ka'aso, it's still that ka'as. When he is enraged, his emunah, his faith, departs from him. For if he would believe that everything comes to him from God, he would not be angered at all. Even though the person who hit or cursed him did so out of free will, and he is liable under the law of both human and divine courts, nonetheless, concerning the damaged party, it has already been decreed from heaven, and God has many messengers. All right, there's a lot of theology there that probably not going to have time to unravel. Furthermore, even at the very moment that the person curses or strikes, he receives his strength from God, who constantly gives him life and existence. So this is the idea. God would never give us more than any of us could bear, right? Sovel, savlanut. God, and right, I mean, this is not often heard in Jewish communities, but in Christian communities, you'll often hear it. God would never put upon you more than you could handle, right? Perhaps you've heard that said before. And so when something bad happens, when someone, I mean, the Reb Zalman gives you, when someone punches you in the face, you know, when someone carries tiki torches, when someone does all of that to you, nevertheless, you have to find a way to perceive that as, what's the word here? Being as somehow a part of the divine will, and that God has some purpose for it. And if you don't believe that, then you lack faith. And if you lack faith, you get angry. All right. So that's the Reb Shneur Zalman calculus. Don.
Well, you just said it. I like what he said, and you just said it really well. I think that it is all God, and that the reason that, quote, bad things happen to good people or things upset us is so that we can find the forgiveness, that we can go back to the center, that we can go back to God, so that everything that is happening to us in our personal lives is a gift, truly from God, to get us to go back to God. Now, the what God will give us is only what we need to get back to God. So if that's just a little lose your keys in the morning, and that's enough for you to go, oh, I'm angry. Oh, God, he or she will give you that. But we don't seem to learn that way. We need, pandemics. We need murders. We need all this stuff, but he will never give more. He'll give what you need. And that may be a lot. He may actually take your life if that need be too. In order to get back to him, her, to God, if you must die, then you must die, but it will always be for your own relationship to God, which means your heart is then pure.
Well, that's so. Thank you, Don. So that's as I've said to everyone here, what I'm most interested is that when you say Baruch Atah Adonai, that you know to whom you are saying that. That's not meaningless words. And Don has always had a very clear sense of his belief system and his theology. And thank you for sharing that. Not everyone will agree with you. I'm sure you are aware of that, but that's all right. I mean, I find it very spiritually moving, to tell you the truth, to hear the profession of faith like that. I think that is what Reb Zalman is trying to get us to appreciate, to see all things as emanating from God. And it's interesting because I think we've almost uncovered this. What is it about anger, chaos, that we don't want to even light a match under because it'll consume? Like, why can't we have that balance and this connection to idolatry? It's, and I think about in terms of Marsha. Let's use Marsha's example of the tobacco industry. So we have obvious evil, There's obvious evil that it would enrage people. So the question is, can you use idolatrous means to take down that evil? I think that's where the tradition is getting at us. If taking down that evil means, I don't know, you can come up with some ridiculous idolatrous scenario, eating bacon or, whatever it might be, right? Or bowing down in front of I'm going to bow down. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I'm going to bow down in front of this enemy's idol to destroy this other enemy, accepting idolatry as a means to an end. Judaism wants to be very absolute about this. And so this anger tie-in to idolatry is so strong that they want you to keep it at bay, because ultimately it's that same impulse. Reb Tzvi.
So Don, if God's in everything, right, then God is in my, as we discussed in the class on Saturday, then God is not only in the rocks at the beach and the sea lions on the rocks and you and me, but God is in your and my emotions and thoughts and deeds. If God is in my emotions, God is in all my emotions, including anger. So for me, taking the Hasidic approach, how do I raise the Baal Shem Tov's approach? How do I raise the sparks out of the anger and lift them up and use them in a useful way?
Here's some other thoughts here. To what is anger comparable? To an unlocked doorway before a thief. The explanation of this parable is that while the light of wisdom shines within a person, he resembles a strong house with iron bolts into which the thief, the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, can break in. But if one of the walls of the house is breached, the thief is able to enter. So too, when a person is calm and composed and is not prone to outbursts of anger for every occurrence, there is no opening for the Yetzer Hara to rule over him. However, if he's angry, the evil inclination will find a point of entry and entice him towards other transgressions. For anger is the cause of all quarrels and murders and fights and the abandonment of faith. From the Bavli and Kedushin, Bar Kafra said, there is nothing left for the angry person except his anger. Judah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Don that, that when that book came out, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, there was another book that came out that wasn't as popular, but it was also by a rabbi who had equally horrible tragedies in his life. And his thesis was, bad things don't happen to good people, things happen to good people. And it's all, that's a much more
Zen.
Yes, I was going to say it's how you interpret it, that you put the label on it that it's bad. It's not necessarily that's how you're seeing it. It's just things happen, and it's your interpretation which determines your reaction. I also
yes, it's like go right ahead.
I just finished a 3-day Moser Kala, and we were talking about truth, not anger. But I think you probably know that most of the Musar masters were murdered in the Holocaust. And it would be so interesting to read how they handled that, if they were able to keep their equanimity, in the midst of this horrible stuff. I mean, you probably read the Pietzner rabbi, Kalman Shapira, who was in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they found his sermons buried in the ground afterwards. And he was able to maintain, but then again, he wasn't in Auschwitz. And I just think it would be interesting to have known, in that kind of hell.
Wouldn't it have been? I mean, it's like Job. It's just basically like Job. Is can you hold up? Reb, but Lisa was going to say something.
Viktor Frankl wrote about that, man's quest for meaning. We can aspire to that. It's not something that anyone can say they can really do, but he wrote about it.
Yeah. So what I thought of was this parable, this Chinese parable, Judah. One day in late summer, An old farmer was working in his field with his sick horse. The farmer felt compassion for the horse and desired to lift its burden. So he let his horse go loose into the mountains and lived out the rest of his life. Soon after, neighbors from the nearby village visited, offering their condolences, and said, "What a shame, now your only horse is gone. How unfortunate you are. You must be very sad. How will you live, work the land, and prosper?" The farmer replied, "Who knows? We shall see." 2 days later, the old horse came back, now rejuvenated, after meandering in the mountainside while eating wild grasses. And he came back with 12 new, younger, and healthy horses, which followed the old horse into the corral. Word got out in the village of the old farmer's good fortune, and it wasn't long before people came by to congratulate him. "How fortunate you are. You must be very happy." Again, he said, "Who knows? We shall see." The next morning, the farmer's only son set off to train the new horses, but was thrown to the ground and broke his leg. Neighbors came by and said, "What a tragedy." And they said, farmer said, "Who knows? We shall see." War breaks out. Emperor's men come to take the young man away, but the farmer's son's unfit because he has a broken leg. And they said, "What good fortune you have." "Who knows? We shall see." After time, the broken leg healed, but the son was left with a limp. And they said, "Oh, too bad." And he said, "Who knows? We shall see." Turned out the other young villages boys died in the war, and the old farmer and his son were the only able-bodied men capable of working the lands, and became wealthy and very generous. "How fortunate were you? You must be very happy." To which the farmer replied, "Who knows? We shall see." And that's exactly what I thought of, Judah, when you reference the alternative to when bad things happen to good people. But When Bad Things Happen to Good People is the most sold book written by a rabbi. And there is something so resonant about that, because for as non-idolatrous as our tradition wants us to be, as pure in not allowing anger to creep in or to be used as a motivation, we're still human beings, my goodness, and we still struggle. And it does become hard when the tradition gives us absolutes to live up to. Susan.
Yeah, this whole issue of theodicy, which is what we're talking about, has actually led to an entire movement of Judaism that does not include God. So, I mean, just for the record.
You want to take, if you want to take the next class, Rabbi, and teach that, I don't think anyone would object.
I've been thinking about that. Not at the moment.
Okay.
You know,
I'll coach you yet.
I'm actually not a great teacher of humanistic Judaism at this point, because I'm very active in the Middle Way Society. So I'm really more in the middle. I don't represent humanistic Judaism very well, because I'm more middle.
No.
I mean,
we like the middle way. We're all in favor of finding a middle path.
But maybe sometime I could do a session on the middle way.
I would love that.
I'm real active in the Middle Way Society. So
yeah, I would be interested in learning more about that. What do we think about teaching Harold Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People next week? Should we do that? All right. So that's what we're going to do next week. We're going to look at Kushner, When Bad Things Happen.
You were going to have somebody from Tablet in.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. Save the date. 2 weeks from today, the publisher, editor-in-chief of Tablet, Alana Newhouse, will be joining us 2 weeks from today. Tell people, come with questions. Tablet has been pushing out some really provocative and interesting articles, and she will be joining us 2 weeks from today. Next week, we'll do Harold Kushner. Take care, everybody. Thank you again for great talk. And Rabbi Susan, whenever you want to teach and share your wisdom with us, we would love to have you do it. Take care, everybody. And join Rep Svi this Shabbat.
Thank you.
So long.
Thank you.